The gravel cracked beneath Caleb Riker's boots as he stepped out of his aging pickup and shut the door with a final metallic thud. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out before him like a great green wave frozen mid-crash. Wind rippled through the trees in hushed tones, like the forest was whispering something it didn't want him to hear. He paused at the bottom of the worn trail, pack slung over one shoulder, deed folded in his back pocket price. $5 and a signature from a town clerk, who'd barely looked up when handing him the key. No inspection, no backstory, just a vague mention of a reclusive geologist who'd died without family. Thomas Keene. The name had meant nothing when Caleb first read it. Now it itched at the back of his mind like a riddle waiting to be solved. He adjusted his pack and started uphill, boots grinding against dirt and pine needles. The farther he climbed, the more the noise of civilization receded, replaced by birdsong, the snap of branches and his own breath. The path was barely there, mostly overgrown, yet somehow his boots found it without thought. The rhythm felt familiar, patrol-like. A decade in the Marines had trained his body to move even when his soul hadn't caught up. He didn't talk to people much anymore, not since Claire and Ava. He'd tried therapy, tried group, tried keeping the house tidy and the lights on. But silence had a weight of its own, and it got heavier the longer he stayed in one place. The cabin wasn't supposed to be salvation. It was supposed to be somewhere to disappear. He rounded a bend. The cabin emerged like it had been waiting for him, squat, timbered roofline bowing in the center. A porch leaned slightly forward as if peering down the mountain. Windows clouded with age stared back, lifeless. It was smaller than he expected, but not dead. Caleb stopped. There, at the threshold, stood a German shepherd. No leash, no collar, just a body carved by experience, lean, powerful, chest rising and falling with slow precision. Her coat was a tapestry of sable and tan, matted in places, torn in others. Scars lined her left flank, pale against her fur. Her ears were rigid, eyes gold, unreadable. She didn't growl, didn't bark, just stood there, watching. Caleb instinctively scanned the space like he was back in Helmand. No sudden movement, calculate distance, read posture. This wasn't a stray. Her stance said it all. She wasn't guarding the property. She was claiming it. He eased the pack from his shoulder, placed it gently on the ground. "Not looking to take your spot," he said, voice low, even. "Just here to sleep somewhere no one remembers." The shepherd didn't move. She blinked once, slow and deliberate. He sat on the porch steps, leaving 3 planks of space between them. She didn't budge, didn't turn away. Her presence was not threat. It was judgment, and judgment didn't speak until it was ready. Twilight crept in around them. The sky turned bruised purple, and the air began to shift cooler, tighter. Caleb stayed still. He'd learned that some battles weren't won with motion, but with patience. The shepherd sat down in the doorway, still between him and the cabin, tail curled neatly at her side. He leaned back and pulled out the folded photograph from his breast pocket. Claire and Ava. His wife's red hair catching the sun, his daughter mid-laugh, eyes squinting from joy. He stared at them in the fading light, his own breath catching in his throat. The dog shifted slightly but said nothing. Time passed like that. Him on the steps, her in the doorway, neither daring to call the space theirs. A sound broke the silence. Soft, faint. A high-pitched whimper from somewhere behind the shepherd. Caleb froze. The dog stiffened, too, ears twitching. Not in warning, in instinct. Another whimper, then the unmistakable scrabble of tiny paws. Caleb's chest tightened. "You're not alone," he whispered. The shepherd stood slowly and turned her head toward the interior. For a moment, something flickered in her posture. Not fear, not aggression, but fatigue, as if she had held her ground long enough and was finally deciding to reveal why. She stepped aside. Caleb remained seated. She didn't invite him in, but she no longer blocked the way. He rose cautiously, moved to the doorway. The interior was musty, scattered with dust and old pine scent, and in the far corner, nestled in a crude pile of fabric and dry needles, lay 3 pups, small, dark, ears still folded. They squirmed clumsily, too young to stand, eyes barely open. Caleb exhaled, a whisper of breath that carried something he hadn't felt in a long time. Awe, or maybe sorrow wrapped in wonder. The shepherd moved to stand between him and her pups, head lowered, eyes on his hands. "I'm not here to hurt them," Caleb said softly. She didn't blink, but she didn't bare her teeth either. He took a step back. That was enough. He returned to the porch, sat down again, this time with his back to the cabin. The shepherd resumed her post, but now at his side instead of in opposition. The last sliver of sun dropped below the ridge. Night arrived not with sound, but with weight. Somewhere down the slope, a fox barked, a branch cracked, the mountain exhaled. And Caleb Riker realized something he hadn't felt in months. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Caleb woke stiff and cold, the planks of the porch creaking beneath him as he sat up. The mountain air was sharper than expected, biting into his joints like tiny needles. A thin film of frost clung to his jacket. He flexed his fingers, shaking off the chill. The German shepherd was still there. She hadn't moved far during the night, only shifted slightly, curling herself into the door frame with her body angled sideways, half watching the inside, half keeping an eye on him. Her ears flicked at every noise, but she didn't growl or move when Caleb stirred. He sat for a moment longer, unsure of the rules. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but a hint of gold kissed the treetops. Pines whispered overhead, and far off, a hawk called once, twice, then went silent. Caleb stood slowly, careful not to make sudden moves, his back cracked as he stretched. The dog lifted her head. She didn't rise, just followed his motion with those same amber eyes. "I need coffee," he muttered, mostly to himself. He walked a wide arc around the door, fetching his camp stove and tin mug from his pack. A few minutes later, the hiss of water boiling joined the morning sounds. The shepherd's nose twitched at the scent, but she didn't move. He poured the coffee black, took a sip, winced, then sat on the edge of the porch and waited. The whimper came again. Same as last night, soft, barely audible, like a dream trying to make itself heard. The shepherd stood, walked into the cabin, and didn't close him out. Caleb hesitated, then stood and followed. Inside, the air was thick with dust and pine. Light filtered through warped wooden blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The scent of old timber, fur, and earth filled his nose. In the corner, in the same makeshift nest he glimpsed before, the 3 pups squirmed against each other. Eyes barely open, paws splaying out in all directions. One of them let out a squeaky yawn, mouth wide, nose twitching. Caleb stood frozen. The shepherd stood over them, tail down, posture tight, but not hostile. Her head turned slightly toward him, just enough to acknowledge his presence. "You're guarding more than a cabin," he said quietly. She didn't look away. He stepped back without turning, retreating to the porch. He didn't belong in that space. Not yet. That day he set up a proper camp beside the cabin, just off the porch. Cleared a patch under a pine tree, laid down a tarp, unpacked his sleeping roll, and propped his pack against the wall. He stayed visible, predictable. No sudden moves. She watched him the whole time. The pups' cries rose and fell like breath, marking time. Each hour the shepherd would disappear inside, feed them, clean them, then returned to the threshold to resume her post. She barely slept. Neither did he. By mid-afternoon, Caleb had begun stacking firewood left behind in a pile beside the cabin. The axe was rusted, but usable. He worked with methodical silence, letting the rhythm of the labor quiet his thoughts. It wasn't for heat. It was for purpose. That's when he noticed it. The ground around the cabin wasn't just wilderness. It had been cleared deliberately in patches, paths smoothed by frequent foot traffic. Someone had lived here, recently, long enough to leave intention behind. He checked the cabin again, this time more carefully, stopping at the threshold each time. The place had been maintained, shingles patched, porch boards reinforced. It wasn't abandonment, it was a handoff. And the shepherd? She wasn't lost. She had stayed. That night, Caleb sat on a log beside the fire he built, a steady flame crackling. He pulled his notebook from the side pouch of his pack, flipped to a blank page, and stared at it. "Why me?" he asked the fire. The shepherd lifted her head from the porch. Her body was angled toward the pups inside, but her eyes were locked on him. Caleb looked up. "You knew the last guy, didn't you?" A long pause. Then, as if she'd accepted the terms of something unspoken, the shepherd rose and walked to the fire's edge. She didn't lie down, didn't sit, just stood there, her eyes level with his. A gust of wind passed between them, scattering embers into the air. He could see the fur along her shoulders, streaked with dirt, singed in places. The scars weren't from scraps with raccoons or rough terrain. They were linear, controlled, like blade marks or wire lashings. Someone had hurt her, and she had lived through it. Caleb reached slowly toward his pack, pulled out a strip of beef jerky, and laid it on the ground, midway between them. He leaned back, hands up. She stared, then stepped forward, grabbed the jerky, and backed away. They sat in silence again. Later that night, just before sleep claimed him, he heard a shift on the porch. His eyes cracked open. The shepherd had curled up in the far corner, near the doorway, but not blocking it. Her body was turned sideways, still guarding the pups. But this time, she'd chosen to sleep near him. Caleb lay back down, pulled the blanket over his shoulders, and stared up at the pine canopy. The stars filtered through in pinpricks of silver. He whispered into the dark, "We're not so different, are we?" From the porch, the shepherd's tail thumped once, a sound not of surrender, but of acceptance. By the third morning, Caleb had begun to notice the patterns, the way the dog, whom he'd started calling Shadow in his mind, circled the perimeter of the cabin before dawn, checking the tree line like a sentry. She was always quiet, methodical, never careless. Each patrol ended the same way. She'd pause by the back corner of the cabin's north face, nose to the ground, body tight. That spot tugged at him. It wasn't just the dog's behavior, it was something about the ground itself, softer there, like it had been disturbed. The moss grew thinner, the stones less randomly placed. It didn't look like neglect. It looked like design. Later that afternoon, after checking that Shadow and her pups were resting inside, Caleb returned to the spot with a hand trowel and gloves. He crouched low, running his palm across the stonework along the cabin's foundation. The stones were too neatly stacked in that corner, too smooth. A faint indentation lined one edge like the ground had settled. He began to dig. The soil gave way easily, layers of pine needles and loam peeling back like old skin. 10 minutes in, he struck something solid, a corner of wood, cedar by the smell of it. Caleb's heart thudded. The box was about the size of a briefcase, worn but well built. He cleared the rest of the dirt with bare hands, brushing off debris until the brass hinges came into view, dulled with age. No lock, just a latch. For a moment he hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside, neatly packed, lay a small stack of items. A leather-bound notebook, a series of faded topographic maps, several high-resolution satellite photographs folded with military precision, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with his name handwritten across the front. Caleb stared at it, throat tightening. He had never told anyone he was coming here. The deed had arrived by mail with no explanation, no personal note, just the name Thomas Keene on the transfer paperwork. He picked up the envelope, hands suddenly too large, too clumsy, tore the seal with care. There were only a few lines, written in clean, angular script. Caleb, if this finds you, then I'm gone. And that means it's your turn. I served with your father Vietnam, 5th Marines. He saved my life once outside An Hoa. I told him I'd pay it back someday. I never imagined it would be like this. There's something beneath this mountain, something valuable. But what's more important is what would happen if the wrong people got their hands on it. I've kept them away. But that won't last. You're not here by accident. I chose you because I believe you understand what it means to protect something without expecting a medal for it. Watch the maps. Guard the truth. Thomas Keene Caleb read the letter twice, then once more. His chest felt hollow. He remembered vague stories, his dad mentioning a skinny kid named Keene who had the eyes of a hawk and the hands of a clockmaker. Someone who could see terrain like it was a living thing. Someone who never missed a detail. Caleb pressed the letter to his thigh, then reached for the notebook. Inside were geological readings, mineral tests, pressure estimates. Keene had logged years of work. The language was technical, but the underlines told the story. High-grade rare earth minerals, dense concentrations, stable veins. One page was marked in bold. Preliminary valuation, $42 million, extraction risk, extreme watershed disruption, irreversible. Underlined twice, do not sell. Protect it. The maps matched. Grid coordinates, drilling test points, paths leading to deeper shafts. But the satellite photos were what made Caleb go still. In the top corner of one image was the faint logo of a private mining firm, Kelworth Minerals. The photo showed this very slope, dated 3 years earlier, surveying lines cut across it like veins. On another, grainy but legible, was a familiar cabin. And standing in the yard, barely visible but unmistakable in posture, was the German shepherd. Shadow. She had been here then. Guarding. Alone. He turned to the doorway where she stood now, her body half-shadowed by the frame, eyes locked on the box like she knew exactly what had just been unearthed. You knew him, Caleb whispered. Her tail flicked once, not wagging. A signal. She stepped closer, slowly, and sat just beyond arm's reach. The smell of cedar and earth filled the air. Caleb looked down at the maps, at the coordinates, at the bolded words in Keene's journal. It wasn't about owning land. It was about guarding it. And somehow, Keene had seen something in Caleb Riker, something he wasn't even sure still existed. Shadow let out a low breath, barely audible. Caleb closed the box and rested both palms on the lid. I didn't come here to fight, he said. Shadow blinked once. But maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. The first sign was the tire tracks. They carved across the lower trail like claw marks, deep grooves in the mud where no one should have been. Caleb crouched low beside them, fingertips brushing the edges. The treads were fresh, still moist. Big, wide tires. Not local, not hikers. He rose slowly, scanning the ridgeline. The forest had gone too quiet. Shadow stood behind him, silent as smoke. Her ears were angled forward, every muscle taut. She'd stopped sniffing the ground minutes ago and had since locked onto the same instinct Caleb felt gnawing at his spine. Something was coming. He led her up to a rocky outcropping above the main logging road, the same one Keene had marked decades ago as a blind spot. It gave him cover, and a view of the southern slope. He dropped to his stomach, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Then he saw them. 3 matte black trucks wound up the dirt path below, each one kicking dust into the air like they owned the road. No plates, no logos, just tinted windows and steel grills that suggested force over subtlety. Behind the third truck was a flatbed with canvas tarps and bulky gear beneath. They pulled into a wide clearing and parked in a practiced formation. Coordinated, trained. 6 men stepped out. The one in the lead walked with a stiff precision that screamed ex-military, but not in the way Caleb recognized from the Corps. This was corporate muscle. Tailored field jacket, tactical boots polished, eyes like glass. His face was lean, every line controlled. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. The others followed like orbiting mass. One of them lit a cigarette with shaky hands. Another dropped a metal case carefully onto the ground, checking its latches like it held something sensitive. Tools, maybe, or explosives. Caleb didn't breathe. Beside him, Shadow let out a low growl that never made it past her throat. He put a hand gently on her flank. Then the lead man spoke. He was close enough that the wind carried his voice up the slope in pieces, broken by trees and rock. Keep it tight. Renner wants a full sweep. No delays this time. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Renner. The name hit him like a memory he didn't know he had. Thomas Keene's journal had mentioned someone, MR, in scrawled, almost angry handwriting next to a circled map coordinate. And now the man himself, Marcus Renner, was standing at the base of the mountain with a crew ready to dig. Caleb kept watching. The men worked quickly, unloading gear, soil scanners, core samplers, what looked like part of a directional drill. One of the younger ones glanced nervously up the ridge. "You think it's still under there?" he asked. Renner didn't turn. It never moved. Keene kept it buried. What if someone else found it? Renner cut him off. They're not going to keep it long. Caleb swallowed the knot in his throat. This wasn't a survey team. This wasn't a mistake. They were here to unearth whatever Keene had buried and erase anyone who got in the way. He slid back from the ledge, every movement calculated, breath controlled. Shadow followed step for step. When they reached cover again, she stopped and looked up at him. Her eyes weren't questioning. They were waiting for his decision. They moved quickly, cutting through the trees back to the cabin. Caleb checked the pups. Still curled in the nest. Still safe. The shepherd circled them once before stepping outside again. Not just instinct. Routine. Protection layered over devotion. Caleb didn't stop moving. He pulled out Keene's maps, spread them across the table. His finger traced the ridgelines, old footpaths, fallback routes. He needed to know every inch of this land. Then he heard the drone of an engine. Lower, closer. He stepped outside. The trucks were moving again, slowly creeping up the access trail. They weren't waiting. He grabbed his gear-old field radio, hunting knife, water, the cedar box. He considered taking the evidence with him, then stopped. Moving it now would leave tracks. If they found the cabin and saw it disturbed, they'd start ripping everything apart. He crouched, lifted the floorboard beneath the cot, and buried the box again, deeper this time. Stone over cedar, dirt over stone. When he stood, Shadow was there. She padded up to him, close this time, pressing her body against his leg. He looked down. "We're not running," he said. The shepherd didn't blink. "We hold position." She turned and disappeared through the doorway, her form vanishing into the darkness like a soldier taking her post. Caleb followed. Outside, the trucks slowed as they approached the first turn. The men didn't speak now, didn't laugh or call out. They were in hunting mode. And Caleb Riker, whether he liked it or not, had just become their prey. But this wasn't a war they'd win in an afternoon. Not with Shadow guarding the cabin, and not with a Marine who finally had something worth defending again. The forest swallowed sound the way deep water swallows light. Caleb moved fast but methodically, ducking beneath low branches, boots pressing into soft earth in calculated steps. Shadow followed close, silent as breath, occasionally glancing back at the bundle secured against Caleb's chest. The sling, fashioned from an old flannel shirt, cradled the pups tight to his body. Their small, fragile movements were a reminder with every step. This wasn't just recon. This was extraction. By now, Renner's men would be moving towards the cabin with gear and guns and bad intentions. They had seen the ridge. They knew the cabin's location. And if they hadn't figured out someone else was up here yet, they would soon. He had no time. Caleb scanned the slope ahead. Mind racing. Terrain first. Elevation. Wind. Cover. The basic calculus of survival, now laced with the added weight of tiny heartbeats against his ribs. He cut left, angling toward a dry creek bed he'd noted 2 days earlier. It ran low and winding, a natural trench obscured by thickets and tall grass. Perfect for concealment. He moved like a ghost. No snapped twigs, no bent branches. Every step placed with the precision of a man who had once walked through IED fields without flinching. Shadow matched him, stride for stride. No leash, no command. But her instincts clicked into rhythm with his like muscle memory. She paused when he paused, moved when he moved, checked the rear while he watched the front. Not just a sentry anymore, a partner. They reached the creek bed. Caleb dropped to a crouch and peeled back some brush. He eased himself and the pups down into the shallow trench. Shadow leapt in silently beside him. He checked the pups. All 3 squirmed but didn't cry. Their eyes were open now, just barely, glossy and uncertain. He pressed a hand against them for warmth, then turned his focus back to the trail. Behind them, no movement yet. But it was coming. He opened the old field radio, flipped the dials, and caught static then silence. Either no signal this deep, or they were jamming it. He didn't have time to tinker. He buried the radio in the dirt under his jacket, marking the spot with a shard of pine bark. It wasn't ideal, but if things went south and someone else came looking, it might still be found. A rustle ahead. Caleb froze, hand moving instinctively to his belt. Just a bird. Wings flapped, then vanished through the trees. Still the feeling lingered. That prickling sixth sense Marines called the tickle, the one you never ignored in country. He turned to Shadow. "You smell it too?" She didn't answer, but her eyes were locked on a patch of trees to their right. Her body lowered, muscles coiled. Caleb angled his head and listened. Voices. Faint. 2 men, maybe 3. Far off, but moving uphill. He touched the pups gently, then slung his pack onto one shoulder and signaled with a soft click of his tongue. Shadow turned and began to move. This time, she took lead. They worked their way deeper into the forest, keeping to high ground. Caleb let her guide the route now. She seemed to know every ridge, every hollow, every tree with a fallen limb large enough to duck beneath. Somewhere along the way the roles had shifted. It wasn't a Marine leading a dog. It was 2 sentinels, moving in tandem. They reached a moss-covered rock shelf tucked beneath a cluster of boulders. Shadow jumped onto it, then crouched low and vanished through a break in the stone. A crawl space. Caleb followed, adjusting the sling so the pups wouldn't be crushed. He ducked inside, bracing himself against jagged edges. The space opened just enough for him to lie flat. Dry, concealed. Perfect. He settled in, breathing shallow. Shadow curled beside him, front paws stretched toward the opening like a gate. The pups shifted, one letting out a soft squeak before settling back down. Caleb closed his eyes for a second, Then he heard them. Footsteps, crunching, hesitant. Voices filtered through the trees again. Closer now. Cabin was cold, but someone's been there. Woods fresh cut. Footprints west of the porch. Small prints, too, like puppies? Caleb's jaw tightened. They know, he whispered. Shadow didn't move, but her breathing slowed, deepened, focused. Caleb's hand slid to the grip of his knife. He didn't want this fight. Not here, not yet. But if it came to them, he'd meet it head on. Minutes passed. Then the voices moved on. Not far, just enough to fade. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Shadow remained still, eyes never leaving the gap in the rocks. Smart girl, Caleb murmured. He reached over, hand brushing against her neck. She didn't flinch, just leaned into it slightly. That small gesture broke something inside him. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It wasn't about Keen's maps or veins of mineral beneath the mountain. It was about this moment, these lives, these woods. He looked down at the pups nestled against his chest, their tiny bodies rising and falling. He had been a soldier. Now he was something else, a protector. And he wasn't alone. The forest held its breath. For hours, Caleb and Shadow remained in the shelter of the crawl space, letting the world pass over them. When the light shifted and the air cooled, they moved as one quiet, practiced, alert. Caleb had made his decision. He wasn't running anymore. The pups were safe in a hollowed-out burrow tucked beneath a fallen cedar tree, swaddled in layers of wool and dried pine needles. Caleb had marked the route with a subtle trail only he and Shadow could read. She had buried part of the path herself, kicking leaves and soil over their backtrack with the kind of precision that made him wonder if she'd once trained with humans who wore uniforms. Back at the cabin, the stillness felt staged. Too clean, too undisturbed. Caleb swept the perimeter slowly. No broken branches, no boot prints. But he trusted his gut, and his gut said someone had been here while they were gone. Shadow confirmed it when she paused at the porch and growled low in her throat. They were being watched, or had been. Inside, Caleb secured the door with a crossbar and moved quickly to the back wall. The cedar box beneath the foundation was still where he'd hidden it. But it wasn't enough. He remembered something Keen had written in the notebook. The surface is the distraction. The truth lies deeper. He swept the cabin floor by hand, tapping for hollow resonance. It was near the hearth where the sound changed, duller, softer, a plank that wasn't quite flush. He dug his fingers beneath the edge, pried it loose, and found a narrow cavity beneath, a hidden vault. Inside lay a metal case sealed with twin latches, heavier than it looked. Caleb heaved it up onto the floor, heart pounding. The metal was cool to the touch, with initials etched faintly on the top. TK. He cracked the first latch. Then the second. Inside was the weight of a man's life's work. Photographs, clear and damning. High-altitude shots of illegal mining rigs tearing into slopes. Streams choked with runoff. Before and after satellite comparisons that left no doubt. Ecological devastation traced back to Kelworth Minerals. There were faces, too. In one photo, Renner stood beside a smiling executive in a tailored suit, Victor Kellerman, founder and CEO. Behind them, workers in hazmat gear loaded barrels into trucks. Next, a stack of printed emails and hard copies of internal memos. One subject line read, Re-Appalachian Extraction Schedule, bypassing federal survey markers. At the bottom of the case, Caleb found a small, battered voice recorder and a USB drive sealed in thick plastic. A yellow sticky note clung to the casing in faded ink. Backup files. If they find one, hide the other. There was also a folded document with the state seal, a verified geological survey, signed by Keen himself, confirming the presence of a high-value rare earth mineral deposit beneath the ridge. The last item was a personal letter, separate from the rest. Caleb, you won't find any medals in here. No heroes, just the proof they'll kill for. I kept it hidden because I knew this day would come. You'll be scared. That's normal. But don't let fear tell you what's right. You already know the answer, you just have to choose it. Keen Caleb sat back, chest tight, breath shallow. Around him, the cabin creaked in the mountain wind. Shadow appeared beside him, silent, her presence grounding. She looked not at the documents, but at his face. Reading him. He looked down at her, at the calm in her eyes, at the scars that told stories no one had ever asked her to speak. You've known all along, he murmured. She lowered her head just once. It wasn't obedience, it was agreement. He rose and began sealing the evidence back into the vault, stacking the materials carefully, methodically. Then he pulled the recorder from the case, snapped in a new battery, and pressed play. Keen's voice crackled through the static. Tired, resolved. If you're hearing this, then they've come back. Renner, Kellerman, the whole machine. I tried to stop them. I thought filing reports would be enough. But no one listened. No one wanted to listen. So I kept everything hidden, buried it where the forest still remembers how to heal, but it won't matter unless someone else steps in. You're that someone. The recording clicked off. Caleb stood in the center of the cabin and looked around. The dust, the wood, the hand-cut beams, all of it had once belonged to a man who tried to do the right thing. Alone. That wasn't going to happen again. He walked to the wall and grabbed his sidearm from where it hung on a rusted nail. Checked the chamber, loaded fresh rounds, slid a field knife into his belt. Old muscle memory returned. Outside, the wind picked up. Shadow paced the porch, her ears alert, body taut. She looked back at him and let out a short, guttural bark. Not fear, not warning. Readiness. Caleb nodded. We're not hiding anymore. She stepped down from the porch and waited for him to follow. This time, they were going to war together. Not for glory, not for revenge, for the truth, for what Keen died protecting. And for the next generation, 3 tiny lives nestled beneath cedar and pine, too young to know the world was watching. Caleb looked toward the ridge, where dusk was falling like a curtain. Let them come. The first whiff of chemicals hit Caleb like a slap. He'd smelled it before, in Kandahar, when insurgents torched ammo caches with crude accelerants. The scent clung to the air, heavy and unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He dropped to a knee beside a rock outcrop and scanned the clearing below through his binoculars. 3 of Renner's men had returned, dragging thick plastic barrels off the flatbed truck. The symbols stenciled on the sides were familiar. Oxidizers, corrosives, flammables. Industrial-grade accelerant. Not something you picked up at a hardware store. They weren't just planning to excavate. They were planning to erase. Shadow stood beside him, head low, nostrils flaring. Her fur bristled along her shoulders. A low rumble started in her throat, not loud, but deep, like a warning bell under the earth. Caleb didn't speak. Down in the clearing, Renner emerged from the cab of the lead truck, his tailored jacket traded for a utility vest. He barked orders with sharp hand gestures. The men moved fast, laying hoses, preparing charge lines. Every move practiced. This wasn't their first burn. Caleb slid back behind the rock, heart pounding but steady. He pulled the old field radio from his pack Keen's final contingency. It was battered, its casing scuffed from decades of use. He flipped it open, extended the antenna, and snapped in a fresh battery. The display flickered. Static buzzed, then steadied. He tuned to the frequency Keen had scribbled in the back of his journal, a narrow band channel linked to Federal Emergency Services. He keyed the mic. "This is Caleb Riker, ex-Marine." I have evidence of illegal operations in Blue Ridge Sector 9, coordinates coming. He rattled off the numbers. I'm requesting immediate contact with Special Agent Natalie Brooks. Priority red, more static. Then a pause, and a voice sharp, professional, unmistakably federal. This is Agent Brooks. Who's calling? Caleb exhaled. Riker, I have evidence linked to Kelworth Minerals. Keane was right. They're here now. They're preparing to burn the site. Brooks's voice hardened. Hold position. I need confirmation. Keane's evidence. Do you have it? Secured. Along with names, maps, schematics, audio. Another pause. Can you hold for 24 hours? Caleb looked at the horizon. The sky had begun to turn an unnatural shade of orange. Make it 12. Or there won't be anything left to find. I'll scramble surveillance and a chopper. No promises on boots before morning. Stay alive, Riker. The line crackled. Then silence. Caleb lowered the radio and looked at Shadow. Her ears were up. She'd heard it too. She didn't blink. He slung the radio back into his pack, pulled the sling for the pups tighter against his chest, and crouched low. We hold. He whispered. Night fell quickly, as if the sun had chosen not to witness what came next. The air grew thick. Acrid smoke drifted through the trees as the first fires were lit. The crack of branches under boots sounded to the east. 3 men, rifles slung, moved toward the cabin, their faces ghostly in the flicker of flames behind them. One carried a canister, nozzle attached, flame already licking at the dry brush. Caleb moved. Shadow surged beside him. They hit the first man before he had time to scream. Caleb tackled him low, driving his shoulder into the man's gut, knife flashing once, not fatal but enough to send him scrambling. Shadow leapt at the second, her weight slamming into his chest. They hit the ground hard, her jaws clamped onto his arm. He screamed. She didn't let go. The third man raised his rifle too slow. Caleb grabbed the flame canister, turned, and yanked the hose free. Fuel sprayed. He kicked the rifle away, then drove his elbow into the man's temple. The body went limp. Shadow released her hold and stepped back, blood dark on her muzzle, breath ragged. Caleb nodded. We're not done. Behind them, the cabin began to burn. The flames caught fast, accelerant fed, unnatural. The porch collapsed inward with a groan. Sparks leapt skyward, carried by the mountain wind. But the evidence was safe, hidden deep beneath the ridge, far from the fire's reach. Then came the howls, not human, wolves, high and distant, rising in eerie unison. 1, then 2, then a chorus, the kind of sound that made men freeze mid-step and question the things they couldn't see. Renner's remaining crew stiffened. Flashlights danced nervously across the tree line. Caleb didn't wait. He grabbed Shadow's flank and moved. They zigzagged down the slope, using smoke and darkness as cover. Every inch of trail was calculated. Every shadow used like armor. Behind them, gunfire ripped through the trees wild, panicked, aimless. The wolves answered with silence. Caleb ducked behind a rock shelf, Shadow pressed to his side. He could hear his own pulse hammering. The pups wriggled against his chest, alive and oblivious to the chaos. Shadow didn't tremble. She didn't flinch. She watched the fire like it was an adversary she refused to turn her back on. Caleb turned on the radio again. Brooks. They've torched the cabin. We're mobile. Evidence is safe, static, then her voice. Clipped, but urgent. Helicopter inbound. 10 miles out. Old Caleb nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He looked at the flames curling into the night, the forest glowing with a sick orange light. And he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. We're still here. Shadow sat beside him, and together they waited, not as fugitives, but as witnesses, as guardians, of the truth, of the land, and of each other. The sky above the ridge burned orange as smoke churned from the forest below, thick and oily, blurring the stars like a dirty veil. Caleb moved fast, ducking beneath branches and scrambling over stone, one arm tight around the sling that held the pups, the other gripping the wrapped folder against his chest. Shadow led the way, weaving through brush like wind, pausing only to check for movement behind them. The cabin was gone. Reduced to ash and embers, nothing left but its bones. What the fire hadn't devoured, the men surely would have. The foundation had collapsed under the weight of soaked accelerant and explosives. But the vault beneath it, the real vault, had been a decoy. The true proof was with him now. He reached the mouth of a narrow trail veiled by overgrown shrubs. Keen's escape route. Not marked on any map, not visible unless you knew where to look. A hidden tunnel entrance built into the side of the ridge, disguised behind a pile of weathered stones. Shadow stopped, glanced back, and let out one low, urgent bark. Caleb bent down, shifted the stone barrier with effort, revealing a dark crawl space carved into the earth and lined with timber. The air inside was cool and stale, untouched by flame. He ducked in first, one hand dragging the evidence case behind him. Shadow followed close, her breath sharp but steady. The tunnel was barely wide enough to crawl through on elbows. The walls closed in like ribs, damp and old. Roots hung from the ceiling, brushing his face. The pups squeaked softly in his sling, unaware of the urgency wrapped around them. Halfway through, an explosion sounded behind them, muffled but deep. The ground vibrated. Dust rained from above. Caleb paused, breath caught in his throat. If the ridge collapsed, the tunnel would become a grave. But it didn't. They kept moving. After what felt like a mile but couldn't have been more than 200 yards, the tunnel opened onto a ledge carved into the mountain's spine. Cold air slapped his face. Above them, the sky was no longer orange but navy black, with the faint glint of rotors cutting through cloud. A helicopter, searchlight blinking once, then again, then locked onto them. Caleb stood fully now, waving both arms while cradling the folder tight. Shadow barked twice, her body braced against the gusts stirred by the oncoming aircraft. The radio crackled at his hip. "Riker, I see you. Do not move. I'm coming down Agent Natalie Brooks." The whine of the rotors intensified as the bird hovered, then lowered a rescue basket on a cable. A figure in tactical gear descended beside it, clipped in, face hidden behind a helmet. "Are you Caleb Riker?" The figure shouted over the wind. Caleb nodded once, too drained to speak. The agent pointed at the pups. "Are they safe?" "They are now." Caleb managed. The agent helped him into the basket, motioned for the case. Caleb hesitated, then handed it over with a single sentence. "It's everything." Shadow leapt in without command, curling at Caleb's feet as the basket lifted into the sky. The wind roared around them. Flames flickered below, devouring the slope inch by inch, but the mountain remained. Wounded, yes, but alive. The ascent was slow, but steady. Inside the chopper, Caleb collapsed onto the floor. His legs gave out first, then his hands. The sling with the pups rested against his chest. The case of evidence was already being secured by another agent. Brooks knelt beside him. "You held the line," she said. Caleb didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat closed, emotion crawling up from a place he hadn't touched in years. The kind of ache that didn't come from pain, but from release. Shadow sat beside him, chest rising and falling, her eyes scanning the cabin's remains far below. She didn't rest until the mountain was behind them. Only then did she let out one deep exhale and lay her head beside Caleb's hand. He turned his palm over, fingers brushing her ear. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. And for the first time in even longer, he believed the truth had a chance. The fire was out, but the story had just begun to burn. 2 days after the rescue, the first satellite photos hit the national news cycle. a scorched stretch of Blue Ridge mountainside, a hidden mineral deposit, and one man Caleb Riker emerging from smoke and ash with 3 orphaned pups and a vault of evidence that would shake the country. The footage from the FBI helicopter leaked within hours, not by accident. Special Agent Natalie Brooks stood before a room full of journalists and cameras, straight-backed and unmoved. She laid out the facts with the clarity of someone who had waited years to be heard. Illegal extraction, environmental sabotage, bribed officials, forged surveys, and one name at the center of it all, Kelworth Minerals. More specifically, Victor Kellerman and Marcus Renner. Within 48 hours, federal warrants were issued. Offices raided. Computers seized. Kellerman vanished from public view, his legal team scrambling like ants under boiling water. But it was Renner who went down first. He was caught trying to cross into Canada with false credentials, 1 duffel bag of burner phones, and a USB drive that mirrored the same files Caleb had already handed over. Renner didn't resist. He knew there was no room left to run. In the weeks that followed, congressional hearings were held. Photos from Keene's archive were displayed on massive screens, streams turned brown with runoff, wildlife dead along cracked hillsides, men shaking hands with blood on their balance sheets. The public reaction was swift and furious. Environmental activists flooded the Capitol steps. Veterans groups stood behind Caleb. News outlets dubbed him the Marine who held the mountain. But Caleb stayed quiet. He declined every interview, refused every book deal. When reporters came to the temporary field base set up near the ridge, he stepped behind the tree line and disappeared. He hadn't done it for headlines. And the one person he would have told, the one who left him the map and the burden, was gone. Thomas Keene. A geologist with no next of kin, no medals on paper, and a legacy now echoed across the country. Posthumously, he was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for his whistleblowing efforts and environmental sacrifice. His name etched into a plaque that would hang inside the Department of the Interior. A quiet man, remembered at last. And the land he fought to protect? Declared a federal preservation zone, no drilling, no development, no exceptions. The mountain was off limits forever. It was Special Agent Brooks who made the recommendation. She stood before the board and spoke plainly. There is only one person who understands what that ridge means, who bled to protect it, and who never once asked to be seen. She handed them Caleb's name. When the offer came through, he was sitting under a pine tree, one pup asleep in his lap, another chasing shadows nearby, and the third chewing on his bootlace with stubborn intent. Shadow lay beside him, eyes closed but ears still attuned to everything. He read the letter once. Then again, guardian of the Ridge Preserve. No salary, no uniform, just boots, binoculars, and the freedom to do what was right. He accepted with one sentence, "I'll stay." They gave him a cabin. Not a new one, not polished, but rebuilt on the same footprint where Keene had lived, with timber from the fallen trees nearby and stone cut from the ridge itself. He kept the old hearth intact, and above it, nailed into the beam, he hung the cedar box. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every morning he walked the trails, checked the perimeters, marked the water levels. He watched the pups grow clumsy, sharp-eyed, full of mischief. They slept under the porch now, dug holes where they weren't supposed to, barked at deer, and learned from their mother what it meant to stand watch. Shadow remained unchanged, still silent, still sovereign. She came and went as she pleased, never too far, always close when it mattered. People sometimes hiked nearby, curious about the place. Some caught glimpses of a tall man with a service dog and a trio of shepherds trailing him like a procession. Most never saw him at all. And that was just how he liked it. One afternoon, Agent Brooks returned. She brought a small, flat box and a federal document for signature. He signed without asking questions. She handed him the box. Inside was a medallion etched with the words, "For valor in protection of the Republic." Caleb closed it without touching the metal. "You deserve this," she said. He looked up. No. Keen did. Brooks hesitated, then nodded. She reached down and scratched one of the pups behind the ear. "They'll remember," she said. He didn't answer. But behind him, Shadow stood in the cabin doorway, her silhouette framed in fading light, ears forward, eyes calm. Watching. Always watching. Because some guardians don't retire. They just learn to listen more closely to the land. And Caleb Riker had found something worth listening to again. By late fall, the mountain was his. Not in ownership, in rhythm. Caleb woke with the wind, walked with the fog, slept when the stars blanketed the valley. The ridge had a tempo now, raccoons at dusk, coyotes in the distance, owls carving silence into the sky. And she was still there. Shadow never slept indoors, never accepted a leash, never touched the bowl unless it was her idea. She lived at the edge of the clearing, a sovereign presence, not a pet, not a ghost, a sentinel. Some nights he would find her outlined on the slope, her figure cut against the moonlight like a statue carved from vigilance itself. She didn't make noise. She didn't need to. Because when he stood alone on the ridge, eyes cast over miles of healed earth, she was always near. The pups had grown rangy, wild, half-feral, but full of life. They splashed through the shallow stream Keen had once diverted, chased butterflies they never caught, and barked at every falling leaf like it might be trouble. Caleb named them not for command, but for character. Echo was the loudest, always circling, always returning. Flint liked the cold, curling up against rocks and pretending not to watch his siblings. Tess never left Shadow's side. She walked like her mother, moved like her mother, stopped only when Shadow stopped. He didn't name them to train them. He named them to remember that life. Even here, insisted on continuing. The journals piled up one for each month, worn and dog-eared. He wrote less about himself now, more about the land, the birds, the rising water table, the red fox with one ear that liked to watch from the tree line. Sometimes he wrote to Keen. Other times he didn't write at all, just sat with the cedar box open beside him, watching the pups tumble in the dusk, and listening for the quiet steps of the dog who never left. One afternoon, he rebuilt the gate at the front of the cabin. The old planks had finally rotted through. He used oak from the base of the ridge, planed smooth and raw. He carved slowly, the same way Keen must have once done. Each letter mattered. She didn't bark for food. She barked for the truth. He stepped back and looked at it. Not a slogan, not a tribute, a fact. He'd seen it in her eyes that night the cabin burned, the way she placed herself between the flame and the pups, the way she held ground when everything around them collapsed. She hadn't fought to survive. She'd fought to reveal. And she did. The FBI closed the last case file on Kelworth by winter. The boardroom scandals made headlines, but the whispers were always about the dog. The one who led Caleb to the map. The one who stayed when she could have run. The one who never barked unless it mattered. They offered to recognize her. Caleb said no. "She doesn't need your ceremony," he told Brooks. She already won. Occasionally hikers reached the outer trails. The preserve was open now, strictly controlled, heavily monitored, but not fenced off entirely. People came with quiet steps, hushed voices, hoping for a glimpse of the man with the dogs. They rarely saw Caleb, but some swore they saw her, a dark figure on the ridge, watching, waiting, protecting. No photo ever captured her fully. Cameras blurred, lenses fogged. Some said it was weather, others said it was something else, like the mountain kept part of her for itself. Caleb didn't correct them, because some stories don't need proof. They need belief. And in the heart of a forest that had once hidden so much, one dog had revealed something no drill could unearth: loyalty, truth, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't vanish when the cameras stop rolling. She was never tamed, but she stayed. That was enough. So now we ask you, what's your story with a loyal pet? If you've ever had one who stood by your side when no one else would, one who saw the truth in you before the world did, one who didn't bark for praise, but for purpose, then share your story with us. Honor the quiet heroes, the four-legged ones. And if this story meant something to you, help us keep telling more like it. Subscribe to German Shepherd for real stories, loyal hearts, and the bond that never fades.